All right, cool. So welcome back to the RunThrough Trails podcast. I think this is going to be episode 6, I believe, and our second official athlete interview. So today we're joined by the incredible Jon Albon. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem at all. And the regular co-host, Lewis Moses. Welcome back, Lewis.
Thanks, James. And welcome, Jon. It's great to have another special guest. It feels like we're getting quite full up with having 3 on a podcast rather than just the 2 of us, but it stops us rabbiting on anyway, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, for those of you that know Jon, he probably needs no introduction, but for those of you that potentially don't, Jon's one of the best trail runners in the UK. Flicking back through his results, some pretty kind of top class results for a decade plus. Jon's a North Face athlete. He also has his own coaching app. He's based out in Norway at the moment, and has already had some massive results this year, and obviously probably has some pretty big race goals for the back end of the summer. So going to touch on all that stuff. But first of all, Jon, do you mind just giving us a little bit of background on yourself, like where you're from, how you got into running, just kind of, a bit more of the personal side of things?
Yeah, sure. I didn't start running till I was 20, actually. And I grew up in Essex and got a job in London. Actually, my childhood sport was skate hockey or roller hockey. So it's like ice hockey, but on wheels. And when I quit that at 20 and I was working in London, I kind of felt like I had to keep fit. So I started running or cycling to and from work. And then things kind of like just kept progressing from there. I got into obstacle course racing first. It felt like kind of like a quirky form of running, which I really liked, and it was a good challenge for myself. And yeah, one thing led to the other. Now I'm full-time living in Norway, mountain trail athlete mainly now, and just kind of like seeing where that road is going to take me.
So did you go straight from obstacle course racing into trail running, or did you do anything on the roads in between?
It was pretty kind of mishmash. I've always obviously ran bits on the road. I did a few London marathons, but that was really just to, run London. So that was more for fun, but never really sort of trying to get good times or training specifically for road or track. It was actually obstacle course racing, then a bit kind of into sky running, and then a bit more into trail and mountain, with the obstacle racing kind of taking the back seat in the past couple of years.
Okay, cool. And how long ago did you move away from the UK?
Must be something like 8 years now, but I mean, time does fly, so you lose track. And also, I don't know if Corona really counts. Isn't that just sort of 2 years of our lives that we've just all forgotten about and doesn't really add up?
Yeah. So was that straight across to Norway or other places along the road?
No, straight up to Norway, but actually to Bergen on the west coast of Norway. And then 3 or 4 years ago, we took another step up a little bit further north on the west coast to Romsdalen. So kind of 2 places in Norway. And now, I mean, where we live, it's absolutely amazing. It's a really nice place for both trail running, but then also scrambling, rock climbing, ski mountaineering. It's got a lot of good things. It's quite the playground. But what it doesn't have is elevation and heat. So sometimes training for races like Western or training for races even in the Alps can be relatively challenging.
Yeah, so do you still get away and do kind of specified training camps for those types of races when you haven't got the climate or the altitude you need, or do you tend to do most of your training in Norway?
The majority is in Norway. I mean, I'm always happiest when I'm at home, and I train best when I'm at home. Obviously, I do get away and do a few sort of camps, but nothing on the scale that you would see from triathletes and road runners and stuff. And to be honest, I can see big benefits of going to elevation and training, but usually for me, it happens in a few weeks before a race. And then I just feel like I get weaker and weaker and weaker. So obviously I do feel like elevation camps can help a lot, but you need to do them well and you need to know what you're doing when you get there and how to train. And that's a skill in itself.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, what did your training look like? Were you living in London when you started doing sky races and mountain races?
Yeah, it was a lot different. Training was, it was my commute. So that was one of the main things. And it was just really fun because I was just feeling my way along. And I mean, I found running really fun. And if it wasn't fun because I was tired or getting a little bit injured, I just didn't do it. So I had this natural limiter. And obviously with a job, you can't run all day, every day. So injuries didn't happen as much as they would do now. Actually, when I went full time and moved to Norway, the first thing that happened was shin splints because I had too much time to train and run. So it was to and from work. Normally, say I'd like cycle into work, run home in the evening, the next morning run into work, and then cycle home. So there's sort of like a natural cycle there. And then I'd join the odd BMF class, British Military Fitness, which was like a lot of squats, jump squats, burpees, like strength training like that. So I think that was a relatively good sort of base for the mountain running, like a lot of sort of plyometric type exercises. And then I don't know, like maybe I was just sort of like naturally took to running in the mountains. A lot of people have said to me that I've won a lot of races with heart more than with skill. So I can try very hard. And I think in some of these races, the person that tries the hardest for the longest usually gets to the finish line first, because everyone gets tired at some point, and it's who can just keep grinding away.
Love that. Well, I think James and I touched on this before we came on the call. That was certainly apparent at one of your recent races at Transvulcania, Jon, where you were watching that stream and you looked like you were in a world of trouble going into that last couple of Ks, but you somehow managed to dig deep and get yourself over the line. But that saying obviously stands true with if you can't run with your legs, then run with your heart instead, right?
Yeah, that was it was a tough finish. I actually I didn't have crew at the race, and I kind of employed some locals to crew me, and a few things didn't go quite to plan. So I didn't quite get like what I wanted along the way, and I think that kind of like added to the task of running that far in that heat and with that long downhill. So I wasn't in the best of ways at the end there, and it wasn't until someone like pointed behind me and said, "Dimitri," and that I really thought, okay, crap, this could go bad. So then I had to drag myself to the next time.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I could feel the pain on that home straight. I think I saw a reel or something straight off the back of it was probably the content coming out of the event itself. And I could relate to how you looked on that last straight. But I mean, amazing result. Obviously then leading into, was it your first 100 miler at Western States?
Technically my first 100-miler trail race, but I have done a few 24-hour obstacle races where I've run 100 miles, obviously wearing wetsuits and doing obstacles along the way. So like a completely different thing. Like racing Western is different to most other 100-milers I can imagine, but also very different to doing it with obstacles. But it's on paper, it doesn't seem that bad, I guess. Net downhill course, smooth, buffed out American trails, apparently. Like, it doesn't really seem that bad, but it's a nails course in its own way. And also, any running race is really tough because you just end up going harder and pushing yourself harder. So it was quite the experience. And I do think it's one of those ones it's hard to prepare for without having done it, to know what you're in for and to go to the lengths of doing the training that's really required to do well at it. You need to kind of been there and experienced it going not quite to plan to prepare better the next year.
I was just going to say that's really interesting from a coaching perspective, Jon, because I have that feeling that sometimes when you see a runnable course, people assume that means easy, but a lot of the time that just means harder and faster, and there's obviously a potential there for more hurt as well, and sometimes people fall into that trap. And when you look at the statistics from Western States, I mean, your time was still ridiculously quick. I was saying to my wife just earlier today, like Jon's time in a lot of other years would have had him right up there, if not winning. And this year just seemed crazy fast in both the men's and the women's race. But then you look at people like Jim in the past, and it did take them several years to master it there. And obviously he has since mastered it, but it sounds like you have that similar, that similar experience, that experience on the course is going to be vital.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, it is a really tough race, and like, it's so different terrain wise, climate wise to what I've been used to before. And just the fact that you pretty much run nearly every step is like, it is tough in its own way. And yeah, like I definitely do feel like we're moving into a new era of ultra running. It's getting competitive. People are preparing for specific events in specific ways, and they're nailing those events. And it's not like you can just turn up and wing it anymore. If you want to do really well, you have to put all your eggs in that basket, and you have to do things that like people probably wouldn't have done before. And then you have to nail everything else, like all the pieces of the puzzle, like nutrition and pacing. And even just for me, I guess, with the heat especially, there was a question mark as to whether I was just going to suddenly faint and go dizzy and just fall on the ground. I just didn't even know whether I had it in me to get to the finish line. So then trying to race in that position is really tough, because like you don't want to push it too much, because you also want to make it to the finish line alive.
Yeah. What point into the race did the heat start to become a real issue where you were concerned about that side of things?
About 4 weeks before, when I got there and realized how hot it was. It was
ideal.
It's like some of the training runs I did when I got there. Actually, as soon as I arrived, I got corona and spent like 5 days sitting in an air-conditioned room. But after that, I tried to do some runs, and it was 40 Celsius. And it was just like, how is this possible? I'm just like, there's no way I can do this. So then I went to the plan B of using as much ice as possible. So in the week before, I sewed ice buffs, I sewed ice hats, I sewed 3 ice vests that could be stuffed so full of ice. I had pockets on my t-shirt that I could put ice in at every single aid station, not just the crewed aid stations. And that all worked really well, but it was extra time to fill up with ice every time. And I'm running with like 2 kilos extra, and the ice melts obviously as you go along, but it's like extra weight that you're needing to run with throughout the race. So I really do feel like I got away with the heat, and it didn't feel that hot during the actual event, because I was having to wear so much ice, which had its own drawbacks.
So interesting. And is it, I believe it's true, Jon, were your crew not at the first aid station? Is that correct? So we're talking about all this best laid plans and everything, but was it that they missed that first one? I think I saw something from Henrietta online.
Yeah, she's actually listening, and she just laughed a little bit. Yeah, no, that wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't a good start. I got to the aid station and just started shouting Henrietta. And then some of the functioneers were like, "What do you want? What do you want?" I was like, "I want my wife." So then they went, "What's her name? What's her name?" And I said, "Henrietta." And they went, "What?" So then everyone starts shouting Henrietta along with me. And it just, I don't know, it must have been like, it was just a surreal experience. And then some friends ran up and said, "Your crew didn't make it. What do you need?" And they dropped a bag of gels on the floor, which I guess was for Elsie. So I just bent down and just like took 2 of these gels. And then she came back with a bottle that was full. I got some ice in the pockets on the t-shirt, and then headed off. And I mean, it wasn't the end of the world. It's just, it wasn't like a good start. And it would have been nice if they were at Rucky Chucky as well. So I think like crewing for Western is as much of a challenge as running Western. Like you need a crew that knows how things work and where you can be. You need 2 separate crews, because actually there's 2 gravel roads, and you can't keep driving down and up the other one. It's like a task in itself, and this is all stuff that you learn from doing it. And it's an incredibly tough task to crew any ultra, let alone Western, which is not designed as a running race.
I think that's a big pickup from my perspective. I've listened to a lot of podcasts since Western, and the reflections are around those 2 crews, and it is a big job, isn't it? It's almost as much preparation goes into your job as an athlete is the same for the crew, and working out those timing points, logistics and all that. But I think it's credit to you for not panicking as well, because it's easy for things to go wrong early and then everything to unwind. But it sounds like you remain pretty calm. You made some decisions in the race, and it shows plan A always isn't going to be the way it plays out. So you've got to be willing to adjust a little bit. I mean, what was going through your mind there, Jon, with like nutrition in particular? Were you happy just to pick up any gel, or was it like, "Oh no, I prefer this"? Were you just not panicking, thinking fuel's fuel at this point?
I was laughing, and I thought, obviously it's not like the end of the world, but it's like, it's fine. Like, and gels work. You just get on with it. But that did mean that I was like a few minutes behind the lead, which then I was a few minutes behind the lead for a long time after that. And it does put you kind of in this no man's land of like feeling like you've got to stress and try and catch up, not really like being able to pace in a relaxed way. And you're just a little bit too kind of uptight the entire time. So it really did feel like I was sort of like trying to race, whereas I didn't really want to race the race. I wanted to just run smooth, my own effort, and it didn't really feel like I managed to do that as well as I wanted.
So how deep do you go into that side of things, Jon, in terms of like pacing strategy and planning things out? I mean, obviously you give it some level of thought, but do you use aid stations for splits? Do you have an average pace for different sections? Were you working off your own timings, or were you kind of going into it to race certain people and stick within, a particular position within the pack, or how are you thinking about it for Western?
Yeah, so for planning, like I used like the planning schedule that like Jim's record would have, for example, but then also have made this race planner where you put in a grade adjusted pace and then do a few other parameters, like saying how much slower you're going to get throughout the race, and then that will tell you when you're going to be at all the aid stations. So you can put together a really good plan of how many carbs you need to get to each aid station and stuff, and that like works really well. Actually, once the gun goes off, you just have to go to your own effort level. Like you can use your heart rate and look at that to make sure you don't go over X beats per minute. But really, it's a case of like trying to run smoothly and well and push, but like within the limits that you have on that day. And I really do feel actually that like the first climb I managed to do really well, like was really relaxed, running quite smooth. The next descent felt slow, like it was actually quite windy and everyone's kind of like picking their way down, whereas I was a lot more happy in that terrain. But then there's like 30 to 40 kilometers of kind of undulating terrain up above 2,300 meters or something like that. And it gets really tiring just to be up there and never really get a long downhill to recover and never really a long uphill to kind of get your teeth into. And I really do feel like I just burnt a few too many matches in that section quite early on, like one of the only places I hadn't recce'd. And I also spent like a long time talking to people about training and stuff. So I think I could probably have talked less and breathed more during that section and saved a few matches. I mean, Dakota, I don't get to see him very often. So when I do see him, it just seems like we chat too much.
Well, I think it's good learnings, isn't it? And like you say, it shows the importance of knowing the course, Jon, and knowing where your strong points lie in that course and where potentially you can conserve some energy. I think that's one of the most underrated things in ultra and trail compared to, say, something like a marathon where, you're just locked into a rhythm the whole time. That running economy, the intensity changes so much over the course of any ultra course, but then there are sections that you're going to favour more than others. Would you say off the back of Western, now that you know the course, do you feel like it is a course that suits you, Jon, or are you more suited to something like a CCC at UTMB that has a lot more elevation in there?
I think it does suit me, and I think I could run really well at that course. But if you moved the start to a lower elevation, moved the finish to somewhere not so hot, I think it would be perfect for me. It's just the fact that it's like you're either up high and then it's really hot. It's like there's no time to just be like, this is kind of nice. It just sucks throughout. And being someone that like struggles to acclimatize because I live at sea level and living in Scandinavia, it's not hot either. Like I really do feel that the best way to prepare for this race is to move somewhere with similar trails in similar conditions with a similar altitude. And that's just something I'm not really prepared to do. Like it would be a big sacrifice for me. So, I mean, if I'm going to go back to Western again, I'd have to think long and hard about like whether I'm willing to make that sacrifice.
Okay, that kind of answers what my next question was going to be, which whether it was an experience that left you wanting more or an experience that made you think, you know what, that'll do. But in terms of the rest of this year, Jon, what else do you have on the calendar in terms of big races? Are we going to see you over in Chamonix end of August, or what have you got planned?
So I entered UTMB. Actually, Henrietta entered me into UTMB, but that was mainly because you had to enter by like the 11th of January or something. So it doesn't really give you much time to think about things. And I mean, you never know, do you? Like maybe something would come up, so I couldn't do Western. So it'd always be nice with UTMB as a backup. And like I never really planned to do like my first 100 mile and then do another one like only a few weeks later. Really, what it feels like. But that is the next race that's on the calendar for me. It's been quite interesting, like trying to recover from Western and try and be happy with not training how I would like to in towards UTMB. And it's not been sort of like a very easy process to feel how much training I should be doing. But that is the next race, and I'm actually relatively motivated for it. I just need to see whether the body's going to cooperate. Mainly just like feels like the hips are just really tight, and that's causing a lot of other issues. So it's just kind of like one of those things, like it's tough on your body. Running 100 miles is not good for you. Like the training can be relatively healthy, but the actual ment is like just destructive to the body.
Yeah, I mean, the format of that race as well. So Western, you were in the 14 plus hours. CCC, when you won last year, sub 11. Can't remember exact timings. Like, obviously, I'm sure you know to the second, but like it's a few more hours on feet, but it's not massively more in terms of time, even though it's 170k or 160k instead of 100. Are you thinking that you're going to stick up at that sort of 100-mile distance now, or has it always been that for you? Kind of build up to longer and the 100-milers, the big famous races, UTMBs, Western States, they're kind of the main attractions, or would you come back down to, short course at Worlds or back into the 100k distance?
I'm not really sure. I mean, the only reason I did Western was because someone said you have a golden ticket to go and do Western. Do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, sounds like a challenge, like a new thing to try. And that's kind of how a lot of the races that I've chosen to do in my career has gone. I've just had opportunities and I've not said no. I definitely don't want to get stuck in like this UTMB rut, which I feel some athletes get trapped in, where they want to do UTMB really well. So they aim their whole year at UTMB every year. Something always crops up or something never goes quite to plan. So then that's it. Their whole year is kind of a write-off. So it is like quite a risky game with the 100 milers, because you can't do that many in the year. And they're higher risk events. Like you're injuring yourself when you do them, even if they go absolutely perfectly. So it's like it is tough, but then it is kind of like a new challenge with what I feel is like a new training philosophy that's required to nail them, and so many new pieces of the puzzle to try and get right. It is sort of like quite a fun challenge. But as to what I'm going to be doing in the future, I have no idea really. I just kind of like roll with it, and we'll see how UTMB goes if I actually get to the start line, and if not, I'll have to come up with some other races or FKTs or something to do in the rest of the year, and make the best of the situation.
That's interesting, John. You mentioned about the training philosophies, and we had a chat earlier today, and we were talking about how those training philosophies seem to be developing very, very quickly in the ultra trail world at the minute, particularly around heat and fueling and, more things being brought to the table. Am I right in thinking Henrietta does a lot of your planning with you? And sort of, I think I've heard an interview before with you where you said she's almost like a coach mentor to you as well, and plays quite a big role on that side of things.
Yeah, I guess like between us, we are coaching me. Like she's a good sounding board, and she definitely listens to a lot more podcasts than I do, does a lot more reading and stuff. Whereas I kind of like to go on my gut feeling as to what I think is going to work, and then sort of like looking at other athletes and see what they do. And then between us, usually like we come up with a pretty good plan, a pretty good system. It's a continually moving target. There's no one great philosophy for everyone, and even for the same athlete, it can change year on year. And even if it's something's been working for you, it might be just a change is what you need. So it's definitely like interesting. Like I love that side of sport. I love to like kind of be self-coached, or at least use sounding boards instead of coaches, and that's part of the fun for me. So I definitely do sort of like enjoy like trying to fit the puzzle together.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good point. I think some people fall into the other category, don't they, where they like being told what to do. They like that escape from mindset. But then, like yourself, you're the other type of personality where you like the freedom and I guess exploring and self-discovery as well. And we've seen Henrietta running really well this year. In fact, James competed at Snowdonia earlier in the year, UTS in the shorter version, and Henrietta had a great run out over there. And is it vice versa? Does she take some advice from you, John? Are you as good at giving the advice as taking it?
I think like we have this running joke that I normally say that like she normally does what I advise her to do, or like she sort of like listens, but it's like kind of delayed by 2 years. So I mean, like I've started heat training this year, so probably in about 2 years' time, she'll try a little bit and go, "Oh wow, yeah, this heat training really works." I'm like, yeah. So that's the way it goes. It's sort of like a 2-year delay. But I definitely actually feel that like for females especially, it's more challenging, I think, to be an athlete as a female. There's a lot more going on within a female's body, and a lot more sort of like traps you can fall into. And it's sort of like it is a difficult task for anyone, let alone when you're a female and you need to do these races, especially with like how much weight can play a role with especially like running uphill. No, there's like it's definitely challenging to get it right.
And so, like, speaking of doing races outside of these kind of, event ecosystems with the UTMB stuff and how people can kind of get tracked into a bit of a cycle with that, I did want to chat to you a little bit about Worlds last year, because obviously amazing place in individually overall, and also a gold for the country, which is pretty amazing in the short course race out in Innsbruck. I actually roomed with Tom Roach over in Annecy for Europeans a couple of months back. And we were chatting about the race. I'm just genuinely interested from my own side in like what that course was like to run on. I mean, I watched the live stream, obviously followed it pretty closely. It looked like an amazing event, and just what that experience was like, not only running for GB, but that kind of team format. Because I know that I got a lot out of it and really enjoyed it in Annecy recently. Is that something that means quite a lot to you? Something you enjoyed?
Yeah, I think it was a good event. The actual event for me was like nowhere near as successful as I was hoping. I really did want to give like Stian a challenge, but it felt like he got it a bit easy. So it wasn't like my best performance. But the actual event, it was great. Like I'd never been to Innsbruck before. The trails are really nice place. And Worlds has gained a bit of momentum in the past years. I definitely feel that after Corona with Thailand, it was kind of like a step up to what it had been before, and it took another step up into Austria. So it'll be interesting to see then how it goes. It goes next year. We'll see. Like they did just announce the qualification criteria for Team GB for next year, but then it is just post UTMB week, so it might have a little bit of a different dynamic.
Yeah, we were just chatting about that again earlier, about that selection criteria and the 30 days criteria around not being able to do a race like a UTMB or something very similar within that 30-day period. So they've been quite clever with that, obviously, and a lot of thought's gone into that, which makes it tricky for athletes to make decisions around races. But back to the race selection, I guess that's a big one. You said you kind of go around it in almost like I guess a freelance type of way, picking what comes to you, and you use feel a lot. And you mentioned running to feel within the races themselves. So are you getting that sort of internal feedback a lot from how you recover from races before you then pick your next one? Or do you map it out long term and think, no, actually, I do have an idea of where I want to go this year?
I mean, normally it's like a year-on-year thing that I kind of think like, what is my main goal or my main goals for the year, and then what races will help me prepare then for those. So definitely like Transvolcania for me was a training race into Western, because it seemed to be relatively hot, relatively high, not that big of a travel. So it's kind of like worked out that was going to be a race that I thought could help prepare me. Obviously, a lot of people use Canyons for that, which is a race that's 100k on the exact same pretty much trails as Western. So sort of like a similar thing. And maybe that would have been a better preparation race, but I didn't want to go to the States that early. And I do feel like the travel over there is kind of like takes a toll in itself. But I'm really glad I went to Transvolcania now, because actually it was one of the more memorable runs I've done. But no, it does seem to be sort of like, what opportunity have I got for next year? What do I want to achieve? But then really like what races can feed into that. And then obviously like I'm a professional, I need to make money as well. And it does really help with North Face to sponsor. But then it's always good when you look at prize money too. And like that does play a role. Like I hadn't done an obstacle race for 2-3 years. And then this race in Saudi came up in February where they said you win 80 grand if you win. So I was like, well, might as well go and give it a go. So I went and did this 8-hour lapped obstacle race in Saudi in February.
It's always good when you've got tricks like that up your sleeve, and but we won't expect you to get back on roller skates, John, and start playing roller hockey anytime soon to go and pick up some prize money in that sense. I used to play a bit of roller hockey myself as a kid, so when you said that earlier, I started laughing to myself. Brings back memories of putting the goals up against bins and things like that, which is quite cool. It leads me on to my next question quite nicely, though, around when you're chatting about those races that you do and kind of picking the main goals, and then from there kind of just almost playing around with the others to make sure they fit. And being a professional, like trail running, we're starting to see now more people becoming professional, more sponsors getting involved, and obviously prize money takes part in the races that you pick, or certainly plays a part. Does weather and where you live also play a part? Because you mentioned going out to the heat before Western and then having to go Transvulcania. Like, I sometimes think in the UK and certainly in the mountains where you are, it's really difficult in the winter to find anything that's kind of suitable unless you're on skis.
Yeah, I think to be honest, like since I had this foot problem quite a few years back now, I learned that I just couldn't run in the winter as much as I should do. And to be honest, looking at like the longevity that I want to have throughout my life, I just don't think it's healthy to run the distances we do all winter as well. So to find skiing and ski mountaineering and use that as training during the winter as a form of like non-impact but great base training exercise has been like absolutely amazing. And I do feel like my career can be a lot longer because of that. So I generally do stop running in the winter. But actually, when you've got like a 100-miler that's relatively early in the season, like Western, it's pretty tough to do that, because to get back into running is the risky part, and to do it that quickly and get the mileage back up that much is challenging. So like I can see that if I was going to do Western, I'd have to keep my mileage a lot higher during the winter. And actually, to prepare for Western and have this sort of mileage increase in mind, I actually developed my own algorithms to take into account the speeds I'm running and the gradients I'm running on, so I could have a better metric to track. Because like just upping how much time you're running or how much distance you're running just doesn't really do it justice, because you do one massive downhill and it's almost as if you've run twice as far as you've actually run. So that was like really cool, and that's something I've used up until now, and I'm going to continue to use because it's been really useful.
Oh, cool. Interesting. Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. Like, I used to do a lot of ski tour, and I used to be a ski guide when I lived in Canada, and it was really good cross training, like for trail running in the winters. But the one thing you don't get is that downhill impact to just kind of like condition your quads, especially for something like Western where it's net downhill for 100 miles. So yeah, that was kind of going to be one of my questions is, what do you think are the biggest gaps when you're coming out of that winter season, moving into the summer trail running season? Is it more the muscular conditioning? Is it like the aerobic side of things?
Yeah, so the aerobic side of things is like incredibly well developed because of the skiing. And actually in those first weeks, when you get back to running, you feel absolutely great. It's just when the impact starts taking its toll, it's like that's when you can get the issues. And you do have this kind of sweet spot when the engine fitness has sort of started to sort of like go down a bit, but the impact fitness has started to go up. And like in previous years, I've always done it that you just try and destroy your legs a bit and then recover them a bit and then destroy them a bit more and go through this cycle. Whereas now having those two systems and having metrics and data that you can analyze that sort of quantifies those two systems really helps make that process a lot less risky. And it has been really helpful for me, and I can see it helping like a lot of other people as well, especially if people are getting back to running after an injury, because following the impact metric is like, it just makes so much more sense than trying to do so at 5K the first week, 10K the next week, and 15K the week after that. Now you can actually increase the amount of running impact your legs are taking, so you can try and plan sessions accordingly. Say, do 10% treadmill, and that way you can run 15K as opposed to just 5K flat, for example, and try and sort of like adapt sessions to make them work to get most bang for your buck.
Well, as a coach, Jon, I'm fascinated by your calculations and your metrics, and if you're willing to share any of the secrets that you're putting together around how you're doing that, I'd be fascinated to find out your thinking behind it. So one of the metrics that James and I use when we're calculating his speed for races is a Munter rate calculation, which obviously comes from the kind of the skiing world, and that helps us to calculate speed over elevation. But what sort of things are you putting together into these calculations that you're talking about that you feel like have been so helpful?
Yeah, grade adjusted pace, I guess, is a similar thing. So that's like a concept, I guess, Strava maybe started with. And I really like Strava's algorithm. So I've based my algorithm very closely on what I can deduce from Strava. And I actually really like that there should be sort of like almost like an industry standard grade adjusted pace algorithm, so everyone can compare. Whereas sort of like power for running, if you use Coros, if you use Garmin, like you can't compare numbers. So if you use the same grade adjusted pace algorithm, you should be able to compare. And that just is a lot of easier way for runners to compare efforts, even when you've got the elevation. But that takes like the elevation equation kind of out of it. The one thing we're never going to be able to, or it would be very difficult to do, would be to judge terrain. So how much extra energy you're using because of technicality and stuff. But that's like for the future. Like I've got some ideas how we could approach that, but it's still way off. But the impact metric, it goes off time, speed, and elevation. So if you do a really fast, really downhill long run, you're going to get massive impact numbers. If you do an uphill only session, then you're going to get lower impact numbers. So it really does show how much like mechanical stress your legs have taken from the running. And then the other, that's sort of like one side of things, which is the running impact metric. And then we've got the base fitness metric, which is really sort of like your relative effort or your HRTSS from Training Peaks, mainly based off heart rate and sort of like the harder your heart's beating or the faster your heart's beating for the longer, the higher scores you get. So that means when I'm cross-training on the skis, I get these massive base fitness numbers because the heart is working, the engine's getting its work done, but sort of zero on the running impact. And then it's the running impact system that I'm trying to build during the spring. And then for both of them, we use this TRIMP system, sort of like the fitness and freshness graph on Strava, or the, I forget what they call it on Training Peaks, but you get your fitness, your fatigue, and then you get your form. And we can do the exact same thing for both. And they're actually relatively comparable. On Training Peaks, an hour at threshold heart rate will give you 100 points. And then within the impact system, an hour at 0% gradient at threshold speed will give you 100 points. So you can almost compare the two. And it does really help you manage to sort of like, increase steadily week on week, but not by increasing too much. So we have this cool graph, which if you've got your line in the green, it means you're building gradually. If you've got it in the yellow, it means you're doing less load than you have been. So you're kind of peaking. And then if you're above the green in the red, you're going to be more injury prone. And it really does work. Like if I go in the red, I know I'm at risk. And I've seen athletes, they've said, I've got this injury. You put their data in and you could see when they've got in the red and then they've got the injury. And it really does work. And I think for trail runners, that's like a much better way to manage load and to judge how much training you're doing, to split these two systems out, have your engine system and your running impact system, because the downhills, they really do take their toll.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can totally see how that would be useful for gradual progressive overload in terms of like the muscular fatigue in training. Do you ever look at applying that and kind of back engineering it? So you look at Western states and you say it's this distance, it's this much elevation drop, I want to run it in this time, therefore during that race I'm going to absorb X impact, so I need to do this type of training to prepare my body for that type of course. Does it work that way as well?
Yeah, for sure. Like so in that race planner, that is something that I'm going to hopefully build into it. So when you upload your GPX file and say I'm going to run this grade adjusted pace, then it will tell you how much impact you're likely to take. And then that way you can use it sort of like a motivator. So say in your last race simulation, you want to do half the amount of impact, or in your weeks leading into the race, the big weeks, you want to do the amount of impact the race is going to be, for example. So an hour at threshold at 0% is 100 points. And actually, I think I was 1,072 on the impact score. And for me, like in the mountains, a 2 to 3 hour run is maybe 200 points normally. And this was like over 1,000. So it's like, it is a big toll on your body. And it really does like show. So you can use it, yes, to limit how much impact you're doing, but also as a motivator to try and gradually increase that impact and then see where you want to be. And then also you get this fitness number, or we call it accumulated load number, because it's not really fitness, is actually more how much load you can manage sustainably. And you get that number and you can actually compare it to other athletes, because part of the equation is your threshold speeds. That means I can compare mine to Henrietta's, because Henrietta's got a different threshold speed to me. So they are comparable. And I can see that like another athlete, they've been doing more of the long runs. They've been doing more impact. They can manage more load week on week on week. They are in a better position to have the legs to manage the 100-miler than I am. Which is, it's a double-edged sword. Like it's great because you can see, yes, I'm improving, I'm like this, I'm like that. But then when you get sick and you see these numbers start dropping, it's almost like, oh crap. Like it can be just as bad going the other way, but it's always nice to know where you are and what fitness you might have, so you can play to your strengths and do the best with what you have come race day.
This is brilliant. It's music to my ears as a coach. I think with my coach's hat on right now, I'm picturing it as I'm doing my planning. And right now, I view all of this as like, what is the cost of a particular session or run to the athlete? And I almost give them like a traffic light system. And I use that traffic light system to help me to map out where we don't want to get overload, or vice versa, where we do want some overload, but we've got to make sure we recover from that. But this sounds unreal.
Same sort of thing is just splitting out the two systems. So that means you can really adapt the training to sort of like accomplish what you want it to. So you can, if you know that you've run too much in the week and your impact has gone over X% of what it has been averaging the past weeks, go out on the bike or get on a treadmill and put it on 15%, or go up and take a lift down and try and limit the impact. We get the base training in a different way. And this definitely means that my training, even tapering, is so different in the spring to in the autumn. Because in the spring, my base fitness is massive. My running impact is relatively low. So in taper week, I don't have to run that much to get fresh. But I have to do a lot of cycling to try and not get too fresh in the base. And then in the autumn, it's completely the opposite. I can actually run the majority of my training because my legs are used to it.
And if you compare that to how you actually feel, Jon, does it marry up? Because one thing I've found with coaching is that often the best judgment is a person on how they feel. So do you score that as well with like an RPE, or how you're feeling against what the metrics are showing? And is it usually quite accurate? So if you're feeling destroyed and your quads are feeling ruined, is that generally matching up to what you're seeing with those statistics?
Yeah, like for sure, like the impact metric seems to really work. And if you do go in the red, there is this kind of like, you have got this deep down feeling of, this is more than I've been doing previously.
Yeah.
This maybe isn't good. And we can also actually, we've got a filter, so you can filter out your downhill only. So you can see how much downhill impact you've been taking. And you can actually look at those numbers separately to see whether that's sort of like vastly different. Because obviously you can get the impact on the flat and you can get it on the downhill. And you kind of want to make sure that you're covering all the bases if you have got those downhill sections in the race, because I mean downhills play a massive role as to how well you can go uphill afterwards. And a lot of people say living in London, it's really hard for them to get that downhill impact. So to make sure that they can get it done if they are on a little training camp, or if they're somewhere it's possible to run downhill, but not to do too much that they're going to give themselves the injury risk, is really important.
Yeah, I mean we've literally been trying to apply the same theory recently. We did a little couple of weeks out in Sham and a week in Morzine, bit of a training camp ahead of OCC. Well, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, not long ago. Life's a blur. I don't know. Time is non-linear at the moment, but whatever. A few weeks ago, and I actually realised that like the descent down from Col Balm, the descent down from like through Brabant from Flagère into the finish, muscular fatigue is going to play such a massive part in those sections, especially if you are like quite an efficient downhill runner. So actually having that quad strength and avoiding the cramps as long as possible might mean that for someone like me, it's quite worth holding back a little bit on those first couple of climbs and not completely destroying myself. So we've been doing some easy up, threshold down, and some kind of more focused downhill running to try and target that strengthening. But yeah, it's really interesting. I think for most people in an ultra of any distance or any type, like the limiting factor is pretty much always muscle fatigue, right? It's never going to really be aerobic. Like you're not running fast in a 100-miler relative to what you're capable of doing.
Yeah, I guess like it's very differently aerobically limiting. Like at some point you just can't get your heart rate up, and this is very much linked to nutrition. So if you don't get the carbs in, you won't get the heart rate up, and it doesn't really feel like you can push any harder. But for sure, it comes down to like, if you do manage to fuel and if you are well trained, it's kind of a bit of 50-50, that kind of like your legs let you down, but then your engine lets you down too. I actually found in CCC, I'd never used music before running in a race. I put music in from Champelac just for the uphills, and I couldn't hear myself breathing. And then I ran so much better, because it was actually this feedback loop of hearing myself out of breath made me feel like I was tired. Obviously, you're doing an ultra, so you're breathing a lot, but you're not really, heart rate's not that high, and you're not pushing that hard. As soon as I didn't hear myself breathe, I got into a much better rhythm and just kind of cruised up as if I wasn't that tired. So that was really interesting. Like there's a lot going on, and it's a real complex thing to try and get these races right. But ultimately, like a foolproof way of preparing for them is to do race pace sessions on the terrain you're going to be running on. So to go and do the descents or go to places similar to where you're going to race and descend like that is going to prepare you really well. And if you do live somewhere like me that only has really steep, really technical trails, then you have to get really creative and do, say, like loops where you run downhill on a road really hard just to try and get the pounding into the legs. It's always like going to come with that injury risk and that risk factor. So that's why just having the data sort of back up what you're doing and show you that maybe you're not doing enough or maybe you're doing too much really does help you sort of like back up how you are feeling.
That's really interesting about CCC, John, because I was in awe of your pacing strategy at CCC last year, although it sounded like it wasn't too intentional and you were like, no, I'm sticking to my guns here, but they are getting quite far away quite early. But I was sat at home going, no, John's got this. He's sticking to the plan. And I just feel like way too many people go off way too hard in these races. And that for me was one of the best examples. I think at one point you might have been like 9 minutes back, which is incredible. But over that distance, it's not really that much. Did you ever think this is getting a bit too far? Were you aware of the gaps at the front?
No, for sure. I think when I came into Champ-Lac, it was like 12 minutes or something like that. And Shen was moving really well. And Henrietta was kind of like, yeah. I was kind of like happy just to keep running and thinking like anything is possible as long as the fueling goes well. And luckily, like, I definitely didn't have the fitness I had the year before, but then I had a bit more experience. I got the fueling a bit better, and I was just kind of like in it to see what would happen. And then once you do start catching, that's another big boost, isn't it? So the race did end up going quite well, but I couldn't have paced it any other way. Like that, I wasn't acclimatized. That first climb, if I went any harder up it, I would have been up towards threshold, and that's just not the way to start an ultra. So actually, with the data analysis, we've put the grade adjusted pace on top of coloured bands for your pace zones. And then that means you can really easily see that if at the beginning you've gone over your threshold speed, like grade adjusted pace wise, for the first 10 minutes, you have pretty much fucked your whole race. Like it is that clear cut that if people did start just that first 10 minutes a little bit more chill, just smile, didn't stress, and just sort of like even just started walking, they could have such a better race. But it's just you get caught up in the moment, don't you? And normally for me, I guess the best way to circumnavigate that is just to be as fit as possible. So no matter how fast you start, you can still stay at the lead and not sort of like be in that danger zone. But definitely for CCC, I didn't have the fitness to go off with them. So I just played the cards I had, which was to go how fast I thought I could and then see what happens in the second half. Especially in the second half, you get down to a bit of a lower altitude. So it plays to my strengths.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, makes perfect sense. I like the idea of just get fitter and then it doesn't matter how fast they're running. I'll have to try that one. So with UTMB sort of on the horizon, John, I know you don't have a huge amount of time, obviously, in between Western and UTMB. Like it's a double that quite a few people have tried and failed or tried and sort of, I suppose, succeeded, likes of Courtney and stuff. What's your training going to look like? Is it majority recover with a little bit more kind of load, or is it pretty much like an elongated taper and you're just trying to bring your body back? I know you said your hips are pretty sore off the back of Western States, your legs are feeling it still. What's your thought process there?
Yeah, so like I think it really depends on how well you train into Western. And getting sick when I got out to the States, I didn't really feel like I managed to train how I wanted to into Western. So then it felt like I had a little bit more psychological sort of like oomph and a little bit more like kind of in the body that I felt like I could train better in this period. But that probably led me to starting to train a bit too much, a bit too soon. So really, I'm just going to take it 1 week at a time and see where we go. I'm actually going to decide if I'll race in the next 2 weeks. And one of the big changes I'll make if I do race this year is I'm going to try and stay at home for as long as possible. So I'll actually go out to Chamonix next weekend and I'll do the first part of the course because I've never run that part. Obviously, I've done from CCC the second 2/3. So I'll go out there, I'll try and run that, see how the legs go. I want to go up Mont Blanc as well. Like I've never been up, and that's always been on the to-do list. But I'm normally always in Chamonix to race. Then I'll come home. Then I'll have 3 weeks at home. Then I'll travel out just before the race. And I do feel that like when you travel out to races, elevation aside, your HRV, your feeling, just everything seems to get worse and worse and worse. And it's just like sometimes I just want to like race just like I've been at home. Then suddenly you turn up and you race and you kind of feel happy and healthy from being at home. Then you just turn up and get it done. And some of the best racing experiences I've had is when I've not even known there's a race. I've just jumped in. And I definitely want to sort of like take that sort of like pre-race stress away and just turn up and see how well it will go. Like definitely being in America for 3-4 weeks before Western, I just don't like it. I prefer to be at home. So for UTMB, I'm going to try and do it that way and see how it goes.
Nice. I think that's a really interesting point, Jon. I think all the 1%ers people talk about, you know, the specificity of being there, the acclimatization at altitudes, you know, getting used to everything. Somebody once said to me, like, all those can be outweighed by not being in your own bed, not having your own pillow, not being in your own environment, not having your same routine. Like, they are often the bigger percentages that play such a huge part. And as you say, you can knock your body so much out of sync. And we see it every year, particularly with UTMB week. The amount of people that get ill in that week is just crazy because there's so many people in the valley, isn't there, at that point in time? So sometimes that strategy is probably a wise one. Keep yourself away, come in, get the race done. Your body will not even know where you're at and just jump in and, yeah, job's a good one.
Well, I mean, that'll be my approach. And I think to be happy and healthy on the start line is really the ultimate goal. And that is like, first and foremost, you want to be happy, healthy and injury free. And if you can do that, then you've got every chance to do a good race. So, I mean, I've already had Corona this year. I mean, that was like what wasn't the best about going to the States. So at least I won't be getting that on the travel out. But I mean, I think like, yeah, we'll just see if it goes. Obviously, like normally there's a lot of fun stuff happening, like a lot of group runs and a lot of like sponsor type stuff, which I'm going to miss out on. It's not like sort of like the biggest problem for me, but like obviously North Face would prefer me to be there. And like that's just something that like going to have to deal with, but I can make it up to them. But I really do want to try it this way and see how it goes. I definitely don't think that being there 2 weeks before to acclimatise at all. Even Chamonix is only 1,000. You're not going to acclimatise to 2.5, whatever you're going to be running at. Doesn't help, and it just makes you more tired. So I think I'd rather just be at home and do a bit of heat training and hope that can sort of like see me through.
Cool. One thing that I wanted to ask before we sign off for the day, Jon. This podcast is the RunThrough Trails podcast. I'm not sure if you've even heard of our company, but RunThrough is one of the biggest event organisers in the UK, and we've over the last couple of years started to dip our toe into organising some trail events in the UK. Gone into some ultra distance stuff, just up to 50k, Peak District and around Surrey. Got an event coming up in a couple of weeks' time in Snowdonia as well. But recently just announced a couple of brand new events in Europe. So an event in Morzine next June, brand new event in Engelberg in Switzerland in the Swiss Alps for next August, and whatever, a load more stuff coming down the line, which is really exciting. But I did want to kind of selfishly take the opportunity of having someone of your kind of standard on the call just to ask you, like, from an event organizer's point of view, someone who's putting together kind of mass participation, big budget trail events in Europe and in the UK, what is it that professional athletes value most highly? I know obviously kind of sponsors are going to dictate where you're going to go to the big events with the big coverage, and prize money is going to play a factor. But is there anything else that we can be thinking about as a company, as an organization, when we design these events from the ground up, that would make them more appealing or better for like the higher level runners like yourself?
I think to try and get like top level athletes, the main thing really is to have, I guess, interesting courses, like nice places to run. Like everyone likes to sort of like run in nice places with nice trails. So to have that in mind, but really there's so many races, the competition already gets spread really thin. And if you want to race the best racers, you have to go to the races where like the most best people are, kind of. So it's kind of like one of those things that once you start to get good people there, it's only going to grow and grow and grow. It's just, there are so many races. There's so many race series. It's just like, it's hard to try and get all the best athletes to turn up to the races as it is, let alone when there's new ones coming. So I don't really know, to be honest. Like, I don't even know how I pick events sometimes. So I don't really know what other people are looking for. But I mean, it's one of those things. Like, it's tough. Part of me would like trail running to become a little bit more organized, so there are fewer events that the best people go to, and then that way you get better racing. But then no two trails are alike. No two mountains are the same. You can't just have one race and say whoever does this course the best is the best mountain or trail runner, because I mean they could be crap on swamps, and it's like it does turn out to be like that. Like when the Golden Trail Series came up to Norway, I didn't even plan on racing, but I kind of jumped in just a few days before. I said, oh, okay, I'll race. But then the terrain played such a big part in how well athletes did. I was shocked that more people weren't diverse enough to be able to just go and do a swampy race or to go and do this type of race, and that way you're always going to need a lot of different events. So it's kind of why I guess I like the sort of ITRA ranking type thing, to try and rank athletes to give a better perception of sort of like who's got good consistency and who's good across a wide variety of different terrains. So went a bit off track with the answer there, but
no, I mean,
I don't know. It's probably going to be the short.
Cool. I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from. I think that's one of the things that makes trail running so interesting, both for competitors and for spectators, is the massive variance in the types of races and the different types of terrain, and the fact that me and Lewis talk about it all the time. The longer you go, the more factors there are, whether that's like weather, altitude, nutrition, technicality, kit. It could even be down to like shoes and equipment and whatever, how efficient your crew can be. It's not just a physiology test like a 5K on the track. So it does kind of make it a little bit more interesting, and more people have the possibility of kind of having a standout performance. It feels like it's less predictable in some ways, which, yeah, I think makes it more kind of interesting, to be honest. But yeah, no.
Yeah, it's definitely not like this person can put out this power, so they're going to probably be able to win this race. Like, obviously there's tactics in all racing, but there are a lot of different pieces of the puzzle when it comes to trail and mountain running. It's just like a really fun sport to do, and it's great that like so many people are starting. Like, it does feel that the transition from people running on the roads to running on the trails and just getting out in nature, it's just great. Like, for mental health, it's great. Even just sort of like, I don't know, hearing birds in trees, it just changes your mindset. It's just everything is good about it, and I think it is softer on the body, so it's kinder to you, and builds you in a different way. Like hiking is a bit more like strength training, and you got to jump around a bit more. So just generally, I think it's just a really nice form of running.
I think that's a really good point to kind of end on and pass it over to James. But I think more people are getting into trail running, and it's because people are finding nature more. We were out in the peaks at the weekend, and there's definitely more groups of young guys and young girls who are out there walking and being in nature. And I think trail running is playing a big part of that. And that's thanks to the likes of you, Jon, who've, maybe they see as a bit of a kind of a reality that, you were into this adventure racing, and then you went to trail racing. You see people like Tom Evans and Tom Jolie, who we spoke to today, came from the army background, then got into trail running. And then you see some of the most inspirational women out there as well, who've come from like cross-country skiing and got into trail running. But everyone has something in common in the sense of they just love being outdoors, and they love spending time outdoors, and going out for a big trail run is like, my wife said it to me yesterday when we're going out for 6 hours. She said, well, it's just a long time outdoors, isn't it? What more would you want to be doing on a Sunday? So, yeah, I think it's great that the participation rates are increasing, and hopefully it continues and people continue to do it for the right reasons, which is what we're seeing, which is brilliant.
There's not many bad things about trail running, just as long as people don't get lost and they make sure they take enough water and food with them, plan a route on your watch so you've got something to follow, and then go out and explore. And really, exploration is one of the best things about it. Just get out there and see what trails are close to your house, and then venture further afield when you get fitter.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that being said, thanks for your time, Jon. Been great to chat, and really nice to meet you. And I'm sure we might cross paths at some point over the UTMB weekend. I know me and Lewis will be out supporting and spectating on the big one on the Saturday, Sunday. So yeah, good luck in your prep. Hope all the travel goes well, and enjoy your time out in Cham in the next couple of weeks. Get a good selfie on top of Mont Blanc.
Sounds good. Yeah, it will certainly be interesting and an adventure. And I'm more excited about the training over the next few weeks and trying out like a little bit of a different training philosophy, and just sort of like getting into sort of like a good training rhythm than I am about the race. But I'm sure the race will be an adventure in itself, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot as well. So I'm excited for it and excited for what's to come over the next years.
If you're sacking the old crew, then give us a shout, John. We're always willing to step in.
Hey, if you hear someone shouting Henrietta on the aid station, just come running.
Perfect. All right. Well, on that note, thanks a lot for your time, John. Thanks a lot, Lewis, as always. And I guess we'll wrap things up there, and we'll see you on the next episode.